Hi, we're back again. So, we just got done talking about beliefs and values. What we're going to talk, and this is kind of the last of these videos that I wanted to make sure I definitely talked about in terms of topics. This last one is talking about norms. And norms are just rules and expectations by which a society guides the behavior of its members. What does that mean? It means that we all, within a culture, we all are expected to act a certain way in certain situations. And of course, that's varied, right? The norms for behavior can change depending upon the circumstances. For example, the way that you might dress for a day at the beach might be very different than you might dress for going to court. Right? So the norms are sometimes specific to certain situations. They can also be specific to different social classes. So people that are in poverty might have a different sets of norms than, say, the super rich. For example, poor people in general have a tendency to talk about their poverty, how much money they make, the kind of debt they're in. They share that quite a bit with each other. I didn't know that when I was growing up because I grew up in the upper middle class. But as an adult, I was very poor, and so all of the people that I hung around, all the people that I knew, until when I went back to college, including my wife, for example. I met my wife when I was poor. She grew up in a very poor family. I was taught in the upper middle class that you don't ever talk about money. You don't ever talk about it. Certainly you don't talk about debt. You don't talk about how much you make. And now I think that might be kind of silly. I've kind of gotten over that over the years. I think that it kind of is negative to not be able to talk with other people about things like that. But many of you probably were, maybe learned the same thing if you grew up in the middle class or higher. My phone blowing up again. So what when I met my wife, especially after I got this, the full-time position years ago as a professor. Here I am, this professor. I grew up in the upper middle class. I learned, that you don't talk about money. And my wife, who grew up in poverty, a very poor family, would get on the phone and be talking to her siblings, or we'd have these family get-togethers of her family, and they would talk very openly about, she would be talking about how much money I made on my paycheck, or if I worked kind of like in some kind of outside job, how much money I made, oh, well, he made, $3,000 in this, and by doing this review work for this publisher. And I just would clench up because it was just so uncomfortable for me, because I'd learned that you don't do that. It sounds like you're being a braggart, right? That you're bragging about yourself. And now I've gotten more comfortable with that over the years, so it doesn't really bother me anymore. But it was, for a long time, it was very difficult for me. Now, norms are the rules that we live by. Some norms are very formal, like laws. Some norms are very informal, like what we call folkways, and I'll get to that in a moment. But basically, we can also break down norms into kind of two different types, what we call prescriptive norms and proscriptive norms. Now, the way to remember this is when you think of a prescriptive norms are norms that tell us what we should be doing. Like, use your indoor voice, right? That's a prescriptive norm. And you think of the word prescribe, like a doctor prescribes you some medicine because you're supposed to take it. Think of it, it's kind of an easy way to remember that. So a prescriptive norm tells us the way that we're supposed to act. Whereas a proscriptive norm, you can think of the word prohibited, right? The things that are prohibited or things you're not supposed to do. That proscriptive norms tell us what we should not do. So, and there's, obviously ample evidence of that. All of and many of the laws that we have are tell us exactly that. They're proscriptive norms. Tell us this: you're not supposed to do this, or you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to kill people, right? You're not supposed to steal all their stuff. Rules. Who knew? And then we can also break down norms into three major types. There are folkways, mores, and laws. Now I'll talk about laws first. Laws are the formalized norms. We think that these norms are important enough that we decided to formalize them. That we don't just leave them up to, putting you on your best behavior. We don't just say, well, don't go out and murder anyone today, because we know that we can't just leave people up to to their own devices on things like that. So instead, what we said is, look, this is a behavior that's so unacceptable that we're going to write it down, and we're going to have very formal sanctions or punishments for that, for breaking those, that you should know, you should be able to anticipate, right? Those are very formal norms. Mores tend to be, in many cases, also very formal. But these mores are widely observed to have a great moral significance. So they're tied to our kind of sense of morality, which again is also socially constructed. It is a cultural thing. Every culture has their own sets of morals and things like that. What is right and wrong, good and bad, right? That's tied to our value systems. So breaking a more is something that wouldn't just upset people, it would offend people. And so if you now most mores are laws. So we have, for example, like an incest taboo, that we say you can't marry your brother or sister. I know you're all like, yeah, right, I get it. But think about it for a moment, right? The idea of that is not only considered a moral issue, but it's also a law, right? We think it's important enough. Most of the mores that we have, like, for example, an adult having sex with a child, a prepubescent child, we consider those things to be so offensive to us that we actually make laws and punish people very formally for those things. And even treat them awfully in society, right? We formally sanction them, and then we also informally sanction them. Right across the street from where I live, we live kind of on the edge of town. Right across the street from where I live, the guy that bought the house over there is on the sex offender registry for apparently having sexual relations of some sort with a child under 13. Yeah. And so, I'm sitting here thinking, do I want my granddaughter playing in the yard? And I've never even talked to the guy, because what have I got to say to him? I know, the way that we tend to think about these things, and me too, is that I know everything about him that I can see on the sex offender registry. I don't need to know any more than that, because this guy broke one of the cardinal rules that we in society, in this culture, we say this is unacceptable. So, most mores are laws. Now, not all mores are laws. For example, it is widely accepted that cheating on your spouse, like if you're married and you cheat on your spouse, we consider that to be very taboo. Even people who cheat consider it to be wrong. And so it's tied in with our value systems. But we don't criminalize it. So not all mores are laws, but most of them are. The other type of norms are what we call folkways. So folkways are more of the informal norms that kind of tell us how to get through our everyday lives. Are the norms that govern routine and casual interactions. These are all of the small things that we live by, that we go through every day, and we learn them when we're young. They just sort of become second nature to us, And then as adults, you bump into someone in the hallway, you say, excuse me. We have norms around, just about everything we do. When you guys come into the classroom, you come in and you sit down and you all face forward, right? Nobody faces the back of the classroom, because you kind of know how to behave. And you can see the value, right, of having so many small little norms that are not formal, but we all know how we're supposed to act. When people don't act according to those small norms, we tend to punish them. So if somebody, for example, hasn't learned that you don't carry on a separate conversation in class, maybe I give them a dirty look. That's a form of punishment. Maybe I say something, right? Maybe I call them out in class in front of everyone else because they're being rude. And so that's what, when people break folkways, when they break those informal norms, we tend to think of it as being rude, as opposed to, if you go out and murder someone, which we consider to be a criminal thing, a very serious thing. So those that's what folkways are, right? And there's lots of them. We have rules around everything. How do you ride an elevator? Well, you don't think much about the fact that there are rules to riding an elevator, but there are. And so when you get into an elevator, you're supposed to, there are certain almost a script that tells us how to behave. So if I get into an elevator and I get right up close to you, right next to you, you're going to kind of, think something's wrong. Maybe I'm trying to attack you or molest you or something, rub up against you, and so you're going to freak out a little bit, because what have I done? I've broken one of the basic rules that we have around personal space. If I get into your personal space, and especially your intimate space, right, really up close to you, that you reserve for people that are really close to you, like maybe boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, maybe your children, your cat, your dog, but certainly not a stranger, certainly not somebody that you have a formal relationship with, there's going to be repercussions for that. If I get in the elevator and I push all the buttons, right, that's also not acceptable behavior. This leads to kind of an interesting idea that we can sometimes by breaking social norms, we can kind of see some interesting things about how people kind of recover from them, how they deal with the breaking of those norms. And so, when I go to the store here in Perry, most of the cashiers know better. But when I go to check out, every once in a while they get a new person, and this poor 17-year-old girl doesn't know any better, but asks me, "How are you doing today?" Bad question, right? Because what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell her how I'm doing today. And I'm going to do it, I'm going to overshare. I'm going to do it in great detail. I'm going to talk about how things are going, Well, I'm not doing too bad. My back hurts a little bit, and I went to the doctor yesterday, and my blood pressure's up, and you can just watch the blood drain from her face. Why? Because I'm breaking rules. She didn't mean to really ask me how I was doing. Another thing that I love to do is when I go to the store, is they ask me questions like, especially at Hy-Vee, they say, did you find everything? And I tell them, I don't know. I wasn't looking for everything. I found what I was looking for, but the universe is a really big place. I wasn't looking for a neutron star or a black hole. So they gave me this look like, yeah, okay, whatever. Because what am I doing? I'm breaking norms. That I'm acting outside of what is considered social convention, and I'm doing it, in my case, purposefully, to kind of make people uncomfortable, because that's how evil people like me entertain ourselves. But it does tell us something right? About how they react to that tells us something about the nature of norms themselves. And later on in chapter 4, I believe, we're going to be talking about ethnomethodologists. And ethnomethodologists actually do this for a living. They'll break social norms in order to watch how people recover from them in order to study norms. That's one of the things that they do. It's very cool. So they watch social interactions happen and and break these norms. So those are norms. This has been the chapter on culture. The chapter also has some other things in it, but I wanted to make sure that we at least talked about some of the basic ideas. I went way over what I expected to do on here. I'm at like 15 minutes, over 15 minutes now. But I think it's worth it. Hopefully I explain these things in a way that makes that supplements the book and makes them easier for you to understand. And I hope that these relatively short videos help you out. All right. So have a wonderful evening, and I will see you next time we have class. Thanks. Bye.